located in New York City, and I am proud to say that we have a graduate of the class of 2011, Laura Allen, who is a sophomore at Barnard College this year, and her mom, Rosanna, is here. So Rosanna, wave at us. Let us see where you are. Barnard College is located in New York City, and it operates in partnership with Columbia University. Dr. Hinkson has served as Dean of Barnard since 2010. Dr. Hinkson holds a BA in Psychology from Barnard College, an MA from Teachers College, Columbia University, and a doctorate in education from the University of Pennsylvania. She brings 30 years of experience in higher education to her work at Barnard. Prior to her position as Dean, Dr. Hinkson worked for 6 years as Director of Undergraduate Advising at the University of California at Berkeley. There, she orchestrated the academic advising of over 18,000 undergraduate liberal arts students. What an amazing job. In strategic and creative ways, she has advised individual students, small groups, and cohorts at critical points in their undergraduate education, from pre-orientation to graduation. Dr. Hinkson worked in close collaboration with deans, faculties, department chairs, and student service staff across the university to build the kind of bridges that benefit students most as they navigate their college careers. Prior to her arrival at UC Berkeley, Dr. Hinkson spent more than 20 years in enrollment management, beginning as a work-study student herself at Barnard College in their admissions office, and culminating with her position as Dean of Admission and Enrollment Planning at Mills College in Oakland, California. Committed to addressing issues of access to higher education throughout her career, Dr. Hinkson developed and implemented the strategic plan for minority recruitment at a number of institutions, including Pomona College and the Liberal Arts College at Cornell University. Dr. Hinkson also has a link to Flintridge Sacred Heart. Many years ago, when she was a recruiter for USC, Dr. Hinkson spent time on our Hill interviewing prospective college students. We still have representatives coming to the Hill from USC. Unfortunately, they're not Dr. Hinkson. Clearly, she remains devoted to her alma mater, Barnard, not only as its current dean, but prior to her appointment for nearly 26 years, Dr. Hinkson served as fundraising chair for her Barnard class. Dr. Hinkson's passion is to work together to develop women leaders and as change agents who will enhance our global community. Please join me in giving Dr. Avis Hinkson a warm Flintridge Sacred Heart welcome.
To be here tonight. It is such a joy and such a privilege to stand before you and to just make some brief remarks, some detailed remarks possibly, about women's colleges and girls' schools and the relevance of both types of institution in today's society. But before I do that, I certainly want to thank Sister Carolyn for that wonderful introduction and her warm welcome. And I really have to thank all of you for the extremely warm welcome that I received, not only here on campus, but to California, you all outdid yourselves with the weather. Oh my gosh, I'll come every weekend if it's like this. This is just amazing. Leaving New York this morning with temperatures that were hovering somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 degrees, and arriving here again this morning because it seemed like the time difference just sort of made the morning go on and on. And being able to first take the winter coat off and then take the sweater off and think, oh my gosh, this is fantastic. So breakfast in Malibu, not bad. And just really, it was an amazingly warm welcome, and so I thank you for that. Also want to acknowledge Sherry Singer in the room as the academic vice president. I really appreciate the invitation to speak with you today. I always have to say, after people read my bio, I am able to keep a job. It does sound as they read that she was here and then she was here, and then, no, really, I can keep a job. I really can do what I'm supposed to do and hang in there. Education is my passion. Education is my heart. I feel like I've had just an amazing career over the past 30 years, being at some of the most amazing institutions in the United States and having the opportunity to interact with students at the point at which they're making big decisions. Anyone who's been involved in enrollment management and spends their time traveling from high school and talking to young people who are thinking about where they should go to college, which certainly feels as if it's the biggest decision in the whole wide world as they're making it, knows that it is just a unique pleasure to sit with the students and sit with their families at that point that that pivotal decision is being made. And so I appreciate the years that I've spent in enrollment management, and then to move to academic advising. I felt as if I was still having important conversations around helping students to choose classes and choose their majors as they navigated the academic halls of the University of California at Berkeley, the flagship institution of the state, was just, again, a real treasure and a joy. But none of that, I have to say, as a proud member of the class of 1984 at Barnard College, none of that compares to the day that I was called and after interviewing a number of rounds of interviewing to get the call that I was the new appointment as Dean of the college at Barnard. It is just amazing to think of myself as that young girl who came from a family that valued education, but certainly had not had very much experience with private liberal arts education, and certainly not the type of place that Barnard was and still is. So to think that I was that young girl going off to a place called Barnard, and then to be called back to provide leadership for other young women, you know how close to my heart it is and how much it means to me every day when I walk on campus and remind myself of the responsibility that I've stepped into to provide leadership for 2,500 young women that parents have entrusted into my hands for a period of time. I count it an absolute pleasure. I drank the Kool-Aid, that's all I can say. I believe in women's colleges, I believe in girls' schools, and all that I'm going to tell you tonight, I need to state at the front to end that, you know, as a true researcher, as an academic scholar at some level, that, you know, my bias is I drank the Kool-Aid. I believe that it's the right thing to do. So I will attempt tonight to just speak to the relevance of women's colleges and girls' schools from the point of view that I really believe it's an issue of choice on one hand and intentionality on the other hand. And I say that because when people approach me, and it's a fairly frequent question that I get asked about the relevance of women's college education and the relevance of single-sex education, I can be quite flippant and say to all of the whys, well, why not? But the reality of my why not is really grounded in the place of it's about choice. On the college level, we acknowledge that there are state schools, there are independent schools, there are small liberal arts colleges, there are large universities, there are vocational education, and the list goes on and on. So why is it uncomfortable to add to that list single-sex education? It's simply a matter of choice. And the student gets to make that choice, the family gets to make that choice, and I don't understand why there would be any sense of concern that a type of education is no longer relevant as long as there are people who are asking for it and continuing to express interest. And the same is true for girls' schools. That, again, as families are making decisions about where to send their daughter to school, they have choices of a co-ed public school, a charter school, a specialized high school, and the list goes on and on and on, depending on the size of school that you're interested in and possibly the variety that might be in your local area. There are choices to be made. And once again, why can't we add to that list of choices a girls' school education? So the matter of choice has to be acknowledged that in today's society we have choices, and we trust that families and individuals are able to make an informed choice of a variety of options. And I think that girls' schools and women's colleges continue to be a choice that individuals are interested in. Clearly, the choices over the years in the United States, when I look at women's colleges and I look at our history, and it's important to go all the way back to look at the fact that the first college or university setting, depending on how you want to phrase it, is Harvard University, established in the early 1600s, and we don't see the first women's college coming into fruition until 201 years later. And I love the 1 year, so I was it's 201 years later. Because, for 200 years, we acknowledge a need for higher education, but we don't know what to do with women. We think that we can leave them home, we think that we can ignore them, we think that we'll open some seminaries, and we are grateful for the opening of seminaries as an opportunity to create teachers and so forth in the early years, but we don't see the first women's college developing until 201 years later. And then, very quickly after that, and that would have been Mount Holyoke College. And very quickly after the birth of Mount Holyoke College, we then see St. Mary's in the Woods. And so you have the opportunity of a traditional liberal arts college, in terms of reflective history. At that moment, I don't know that they were referring to it as traditional, but you have the liberal arts opportunity, and then St. Mary's in the Wood providing a religiously affiliated opportunity, and then shortly after that, 40 years later, you have Spelman as a historically black women's college. So you see that this range of choice that exists makes it clear that women's colleges are not a monolithic group. That there is diversity even within women's colleges, and they range even today from a small women's college of roughly 500 students up to a larger one approaching 4,000 students. With schools, women's colleges that are affiliated with large institutions like Barnard College and our relationship with Columbia, to inclusion in university settings like at Rutgers, and the list goes on and on. So the choices are there for our students to make and for our families to make. And I think that the relevance is choice is part of the American way. Choice is part of our history of education in these United States. So when I continue to think about this point of choice, I have to also say, well, what are they choosing? Because it's not just a matter of saying, here are 5, 7, 10 different options, but what are you really choosing when you say, I want to go to a girls' school, I want to go to a women's college? And that's the point where I move from choice to intentionality. And in some ways, the intentionality piece for me is even more important. Because when a girl goes into an all-girls school, when a woman goes to a women's college, what is she getting that's going to be different in some kind of significant and tangible way than what she would get in another environment? Because we aren't looking for choice just to be a matter of variety, but really to be a tangible difference that would allow a student to be making not just an informed choice or a wise choice, but that there is a tangible choice based on difference. And so when I think about the place that we are in society now, I have to acknowledge that on the part of women's colleges, that of the college-going female population today, only 2% of them are choosing women's colleges. We, at the high point of women's colleges, there were some 200 women's colleges in the United States. Now we're at about 57 or 58, depending on how you count. So the numbers have changed dramatically, but our representation or our presentation of women's college graduates in key listings and key positions continue to remain vibrant. And I would point to the fact that that when we look at some statistical notions, we see that even if we look at Business Week's list of rising stars in America, 30% of those women are graduates of women's colleges, and these are young women. So while you're talking about 2%, you're still talking about 30% in terms of their place in society and their ability to influence others and have an impact on our society. So our young women are making a choice for women's colleges. Why? And that's where I drift into, as I said, intentionality. Because the intersection of choice and intentionality is the space where I think the research needs to be brought to the forefront. And so the book that I point to all the time, and was written in 1999, which, you know, as soon as I say to the students anything in 1999, in my own head I think, oh my gosh, I'm talking about the 1900s. They're just horrified referencing the 1900s, you know, because that was just old. But nonetheless, the book that I love the most is written by M.E. Tidball, and the book is called Taking Women Seriously. Lessons and Legacies for Educating the Majority. And when we look at the research that she did, she and her colleagues, she identifies six characteristics of an ethos of a women's college. And I think that, again, this is where women's colleges separate themselves from the pack. And her 6 points include involving the total collegiate experience in the education of women. So that it's not just a subset of an experience, but it's the total experience. Ensuring women the opportunity to study in all fields, especially those that have been unwelcoming to women in the past. So we look at fields like math and the number of young ladies at Barnard who are majoring in mathematics and statistics as compared to co-ed schools. And we see that the numbers are drastically different because they feel comfortable in those classes in a women's college. That there's a critical mass of female role models. And I think that it's important not to just have female role models, but female role models who are conscious of their responsibility to groom the next generation of women. Her list also includes the demonstrating of a principle of networking, helping our young women to understand the value of building relationships that will have impact not just on friendships, but also on their careers and their future life. That they are part of a bigger whole. They're not just seeing the world through their lens as a single individual, but part of a community. Creating a place and time for developing deep and lasting friendships. So this is where I distinguish the networking from the friendships. But we see that when girls come together in girls' schools and at women's colleges, that friends are built and lifelong friendships are developed. And I always like to talk to my students at Barnard and say to them, I'm not really as interested in the friendships that you make and you say, oh, these are my closest friends, these are going to be my bridesmaids, because it's easy to get a bridesmaid. It's easy to do that. You can always find somebody else who's willing to dress up. So you know, that's not the criteria. The criteria, I say to them, is where are the women who are going to stand with you in the difficult moments? Where are the ones who are not going to just stand with you in the happy moments, but are going to be there when the tears are streaming? And those are the kinds of friendships that I'm concerned about our students making, and those are the kinds of friendships that they make at girls' schools and women's colleges. And lastly, Tidball identifies that the part of the ethos is encouraging the generosity of women on behalf of others. And again, it's not just service to the community in a broad and global sense, but it's coming from a community that says, you have a responsibility to your sister. You have a responsibility to someone other than yourself. And how are you going to live that out on a daily basis is what is instilled at a women's college and at a girls' school. And so I offer this list because I think that it is the commitment that is found at women's colleges and girls' schools that make the experience unique, make it much more tangible, make it something that provides a foundation for our girls to build upon in future years. I would also comment that my own, as I tell you, I drank the Kool-Aid. So I went off to graduate school and for my dissertation, for my doctoral dissertation, when they said, well, you know, what is your question? What are you going to dig deep in and think about? And all I could think about is women's education, you know? And so I did a case study on Barnard, and keep in mind that I was not at Barnard at this time, but Barnard has been an amazingly impactful part of my life. As I mentioned at the outset, I'm a first-generation college goer to the extent that my parents were immigrants and came to this country believing that education and faith in God were the way to be successful, and raised children with the belief that college was the next step. There wasn't really a question. My father's favorite line is, I never went to college, but I hear it's 4 years. That's really all he was focused on. It's like, don't be confused about whatever. It was just like, I've never been there, but it's 4 years. And so, you know, I had a very clear sense I was going to go to college, but where I was going to go to college was really left to a very limited exposure as to what college had to offer. I'm the youngest child in my family, and my older siblings went to Brooklyn College, which would be comparable here in California to going to a CSU. And so, you know, that was familiar, that was comfortable, the older siblings did it, and certainly it was expected that I would just, you know, walk right in the footsteps. But being the baby in the family, you know, life can never be that simple. My family depends on me for entertainment, so I had to, you know, kind of come up with something new and different. And my best friend from second grade on called me one night, senior year of high school, and said, you know, my grandmother graduated from Barnard, and the Barnard rep will be at our high school tomorrow, and my grandmother said that both of us better be there. You know, I'm still not clear as to why I needed to be there, but nonetheless, her grandmother said we both had to be there. I was there. I was blown away by the presentation made by the recruiter, and I can still remember her name, Allison France, who came to my high school. And I went to a large public co-ed high school. I, you know, was pretty outgoing, pretty forthright, a talker. And so, you know, there was no part of me that was at all shy or reserved or not one to speak up or had any sense that I wasn't getting, you know, my piece of the pie at the high school. But somehow, as this woman talked to us girls about a women's college, it resonated. And I thought, this is what I need to do. And so I went home that evening to inform my entire family that I was going to Barnard College and they should all, you know, get ready. You know, my mom took a look at this brochure that I was, you know, waving in her face at this point, and her first comment was, this college costs more than your dad made last year. And I said, well, you know, that's true, but they said something about financial aid, so this is where I'm going. They had to sort of wrestle me to the ground to get me to apply to a couple of other colleges because I was going to Barnard. I'm grateful that I survived the admissions process and was actually admitted to Barnard, because I think I would have just shown up on the first day, even if I wasn't admitted. I was that determined. And I went to Barnard really holding on to the words of a recruiter that there was something different and something special that was going to be cultivated in me when I came into this community. And that sense of something special being cultivated is the exact point that I brought to bear on my doctoral dissertation when I asked the question about what are the components of a women's college experience that cultivates leaders. Because the research in Tidball and other colleagues talk about high-achieving women as an outcome of women's education. But for me, it was really about the leadership development that's such a key component, and so much of the information, and even the rhetoric, I would say, of women's colleges, that we are constantly talking about creating leaders. But what are the factors that really make the experience unique? And so that's really where I spent time digging around to say, what's different? And after doing qualitative interviews with graduates of women's colleges, I came away with a sense that a community conducive to leadership development is what is special about a women's college. And when I say that, it's really about a place where setting high goals for women is the norm. And that a place where the expectations of success are high. And the role models in the place, and in my own research and in my own conversations with alumni, is around the fact that the role models are not just female. While the female role models are critical and wonderful, and the variety of them gives you the opportunity to see leadership and career growth in a range of different ways that it's manifested. Because one of my concerns is that our girls need not think there's only one way to be a leader. They need to be clear that they should be who they are, and that who they are is good enough. And their leadership should come out of who they are. And they shouldn't try to sound like anybody else, but they should be themselves. So those female role models are important, but I also think the male role models that choose to be on faculty and be in administrative positions and staff positions at girls' schools and women's colleges are also critical, because they are men that are speaking into our girls' lives to say that from me, you will hear the "you can do it" as opposed to what you can't do. And so that too is important for the leadership development within the community of women's colleges. And then lastly, that their peers are not just a bunch of friends and not just this network, but that the balance of challenge and support is there. That their friends in classes, their peers in classes are there to say, I support you, I come alongside you, I'm willing to be on your committee, I'm willing to partner with you, but I'm also willing to ask you the tough questions. And I always at this point think of a conversation that I had with a faculty member when I was at Mills, and she was fairly new to Mills and she had taught at Harvard prior to coming to Mills. And she said that when she was at Harvard and she would call on a young woman in a co-ed class, she wanted the young woman to appear right. And she didn't want to in any way cause her to question herself or be less than, because she felt that the young men in the class were already saying, you know, there are distinctions being made between the female students and the male students. And so she always wanted this young woman to look as if she knew what she was talking about. And so she would sort of stop with the first question or not press too hard. But at a women's college, she said when she came to Mills, she began to realize that her expectation was not for the student to look right, but to be right. And so she was willing to push them with the next question and the next question and the next question, so that the student was forced to dig deep and to admit what she knew and what she did not know. And that's what really helps to cultivate someone who is balanced enough to seek help when she needs it, but also to be confident in her ability to speak to what she does know and speak to it loudly. As I move from talking about women's colleges to all-girls schools, I have to say that the research addresses the question as to whether you know, the women's college experience is really one of initiation into leadership or confirmation. And again, in terms of my research and my work, what I came away with is that at the level of a women's college, it's really a critical confirmation. And so as I talked to different alums, again, they said, you know, I'd heard this before, that there was something different about me, that there was something unique, that there was leadership capabilities, that I had great potential. I'd heard that before. But when I got to college, having it confirmed by a community outside of my home community was powerful. Because in some ways, I took my home community for granted. But when this next place said, yes, I see it too, all of a sudden it flourished at a different level. And so that, for me, speaks to the importance for all-girls schools. Because I need to be sure that our girls are having that first experience with someone saying, you're a leader. I see the potential in you. You can be more and do more than you're doing today. And so I really see the role of an all-girls school as a place where you're taking girls and you are really cultivating a seed in them to say, what's in you already will bloom, will blossom, will develop into so much more, but we see it now. And so with girls' schools, I think that we see that girls walk away feeling valued. And even as I've spoken with many of you tonight, and you've acknowledged that my daughter's been here at Flint Ridge for a year, and she's changed. She comes home different. She's not as shy as she was before. It's because she's feeling valued. It's because she's feeling that big dreams are being cultivated in her, where she hears the "you can" more than you can't, where she knows that her needs are being addressed as an intentional goal as opposed to just happenstance. It can't be the cultivation of women that are going to be high achieving and to be leaders cannot be just taken by chance. But they have to be an environment that looks them directly in the eye every day and says, yes, I see it. And that's what happens in a girls' school. And so I think that as I compare and contrast or join together in partnership the girls' school and the women's college, I see that it's across a spectrum. And we at Barnard, as Barnard approaches her 125th anniversary next year, we are really intrigued and interested in the intergenerational and the multi-generational relationships that women have. And it goes back to the girls' school. It goes back to the earliest moments where girls are told that their friendships matter, their community building matters. And that all happens at a girls' school so that as they move into a women's college, they have a foundation that we can build on. And so, you know, tonight as I spend the time with you here at Flint Ridge and I hear Sister Carolyn talk about your mission and your commitment to young women, you know, I would offer to you just the encouragement to say that you know that girls are important. You know that what you're pouring into them and the investment that you're making in them is crucial. And that we do most certainly live in a co-ed world, but why wouldn't we wish to set time aside to have a single-sex experience that strengthens and grooms characteristics in our girls so that as they move out into a co-ed world, they are even more so prepared to face the challenges that are most certainly ahead of them. Because our goals are not short-sighted, but are really looking down the road into their future. And while we see their future as bright, we sit at the table tonight and acknowledge that there are challenges in life. And we want to be sure that our girls are strengthened and fortified so that as they walk up on those challenges, we know that we've done all that we can to prepare them for what's ahead. And so I'm going to pause there, because I hope that we can have a bit of a conversation and that you will engage with me in questions and answers about single-sex education. And that you would be willing to you know, ask the tough questions and see where we can get with some answers that I hope I can provide, but also that you might wish to entertain in the conversation and providing some of the answers as well. Some of you, as you greeted me earlier in the evening, acknowledged that you too had graduated from women's colleges, so I'm depending on you to, you know, drink the Kool-Aid and, you know, testify if necessary. And those of you who have gone to girls' schools, speak and draw on your own experiences as well as those experiences that your daughters are having, and those of you that are prospective parents, the experiences that you hope your daughter will have in the future. But as I make this transition, I feel that I should certainly draw on one of Barnard's amazing graduates to offer a quote. I tend to walk around with a few quotes from Barnard women just because, you know, they say great things. And so for tonight's conversation, I'm going to look to Margaret Mead, who says, always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everyone else. So let's talk a bit. What are the questions that you have, and what are the thoughts you'd like to share?
I have a question. Of the applicants that you get at Barnard, how many are coming from a co-ed environment versus an all
You know, there's a little bit of an ebb and a flow, but I would say roughly about 20% come from all girls schools. Between 15 and 20, let's go there. We see. You know, the number of transfers who come from all girls schools are the ones that I find interesting. Because, and No, the ones who have who've gone to an all-girls school and say, I got to get out of the estrogen bubble, I'm going to a co-ed, and then a year later go, oh, now I'll go to the women's college. Sometimes you got to try something different to decide what the value is.
Well, just to piggyback on that, have you spoken to any of those girls to ask them what the difference was for them in that co-ed environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the numbers are small for us, so I don't want to make it seem as if, you know, this is some major study here. But it's really, you know, they said in many cases that they just thought they had to do the other thing. You know, I went to all-girls school, maybe K through 12, and I just thought I should have this other experience, and then they have the other experience, and whether it's a matter of the major that they're interested in, or how they felt in the community, or whether they felt they were getting the same level of support, you know, those are the kinds of issues that they tend to raise as reasons that they decided to transfer. I also think, in fairness, I also think that they've typically been at a much larger place. And so they're used to a smaller community. And all of a sudden, you know, I love it when I talk to girls, but students, I would say in general, who are coming out of small schools and they're, oh, I have to go to a large university. And I'm like, yeah, a small college will still be a large university to you because you've been at school with 400 students, 2,500 is large. You know, so what their comparisons are and their sense of what different looks like.
This is not a question, it's a comment. From having been here for many, many years, when our girls come back from college, whether they're single-sex or co-ed, almost invariably they will talk about conversations with other classmates who are horrified that they went to an all-girls school. And these are women that are saying this. And of course they all come back with, well, why would you say that? We had a wonderful experience. But it seems to me that there's a lot of other women to educate who, you know, have the same sex as their classmates, but they don't see that as an advantage.
Well, I think if you haven't experienced it, it's hard to see the benefit of something that you haven't experienced, no matter what it is. And so I think if you haven't been to an all-girls school, you haven't been to a women's college, it's difficult for you to think that it might be a positive experience. Despite whatever statistics someone might offer you, you're still saying, you know, my experience was fine and I've made it to this point in life, so why do I need that? And I still say to them, because choice is important. And I applaud the success that you have achieved and would never want to minimize any of that, but I will stand firmly to say that, you know, there is something special that happens in an all-girls or a women's environment. But I think there's education to do. And you know, the point about education, at this point as we look at the statistics, we're looking at many co-ed colleges for possibly the first time in their history, having over half of their students be girls or women. And so this is a critical moment, I believe, in the history of higher education and the history of education for women's colleges and for girls' schools to provide leadership to those co-ed schools and say, this is how you educate women and girls, because these schools are now dealing with the fact, oh my gosh, we have 55% of our students are women, and what are the unique needs that we need to address, and how do we go about doing that? And so I see a new opportunity opening up for women's colleges if we should choose to step into it, and certainly for girls' schools to do likewise and to provide that level of leadership on the appropriate level.
How would your comments be different if you were talking to an audience about all boys?
Well, that's an interesting question because, you know, the data is a bit different for all boys schools and for, you know, all male colleges, having been one of those folks who was at Barnard when Columbia College was still all male. You know, men tend to benefit, or boys tend to benefit from being in a co-ed environment. So if I was talking to an audience of prospective parents for an all-male K through 12 school or high school or what have you, I would still talk about choice because I think it's important to have those choices. But I would have to acknowledge that the data suggests that a co-ed environment provides a level of competition that boys find to their benefit. And so, you know, as a researcher, I would have to be honest about that and say it's a choice, and you know your son best, and is this an environment in which he's going to be successful? And despite the fact that research may say in generality X, what is the specific need of your son?
And does it not provide the same benefit to women? I think my question is, at what age, maturity-wise, developmentally, is it important for women to be with men and learning and hearing their ideas and thoughts?
Well, I think that the statistics, most of them that are comparing co-ed environments are looking at the K through 12 work and seeing who benefits in that environment. On the college level, again, I think you look at the outcomes in terms of women from women's colleges and their place in society, and there's support there for it. It depends on which women's college you're looking at, but when you're looking at a place like Barnard, we're in the middle of New York City and we have a relationship with Columbia across the street. We are certainly not depriving anyone of exploring their ideas, as you say, in a co-ed environment. Our students are constantly engaged with a co-ed world in terms of their internships, in terms of all kinds of experiences that they're having. But I think the grounding that they have when they come to me as their dean and say, this is what I'm going to do, I begin to talk to them and talk to their class as you are young women, and this is how I expect you to approach. These are the questions we're going to address. This is what our faculty is committed to doing, and I'm speaking directly to young women. And so I think that the difference for me is around a 4-year experience or even a 16-year experience if you're talking about K through college, but it's not their entire life. But if you are solid in your foundation, then my belief is that as you move into a co-ed world, there's no surprise. That's what we've been talking about all along. But are you prepared to compete in that world? And I think you are when you know who you are.
I'm curious about the status of women who do their 4 years undergrad and actually go on to graduate school from a women's college versus women who are at a co-ed 4-year college school undergrad.
Not as much research, kind of slim pickings, but what's there speaks again pretty highly to the fact that you see greater numbers of women coming out of non-traditional fields and going into graduate programs in engineering and math and those kinds of things. You see certainly the breadth of the liberal arts experience being fully explored with women's colleges represented pretty highly in PhD level work. So again, I think it's a matter of providing a solid foundation with clarity that you're not going to go to a single-sex master's program, you're not going to go to a single-sex PhD program, but have you developed the skill set that will allow you to be successful in that environment, and has the academic rigor been such that you're able to stand on your own?
As a woman in business, later on in my career, not at the beginning, I've gotten involved in women's diversity initiatives to help. And there's a lot of data out there that shows that how women manage their careers, particularly in business, is very different from men. How we approach things are very different. And so it's been helpful to me and other women to have to understand that and to help maneuver the career. Do you use that type of data to prepare women before they go out into the world in their particular fields?
I think it's not only the data, but it's the day-to-day conversation. So, for example, our president, President Deborah Spar, recently wrote an article about women having it all. And that was a hot article on our campus where we talk about how are you going to balance not only your career but your life. And that conversation is not put on a back burner or thought to be unimportant. But we talk about, women are as women you will likely, not all of you, but many of you, be thinking about balancing children. How do you do that? How do you continue to cultivate relationships with other women as you move into the workplace? Our students had a panel last year and they asked a number of staff and administrators to participate in a conversation about what it means to be successful and what's the balance between individual success as opposed to the success of a community. And, the students of today are much more individualistic in their thinking than my classmates were. We definitely thought of Barnard as a whole, our class as a whole, and one of us was going to get everything that there was, and so if there was some prize, if there was that we were very much competing, but we were very comfortable with applauding the success of somebody else. And so we talk with students about, what kind of support are you offering someone else and how will that influence your career? Are you going to get a job in a particular company, see an opportunity for somebody else, and seek out a classmate for that? Or are you going to just say, I'm the lone star and I have to, be the star all by myself? So I think that those conversations are woven in on a regular basis. Especially in fields where we have adjunct faculty teaching. I would point to architecture as one example where we're bringing in the folks from industry to actually teach. Those conversations are even more prevalent.
I will say, as a mom of 2 girls here and as a graduate of a women's college, how much I appreciate what you're saying. And one thing that really resonated with me when hearing some of your remarks is the role that mentors play. Because that was for me when I went to Scripps in Crema, and though we were surrounded by other colleges, so guys were around, sure. That was important as a 17-year-old. It was interesting to me how individual people on campus, whether it's professors or the dean of students, would come to us individually. We'd have those opportunities for those day-to-day conversations where there was reinforcement of something they saw in you that could be, in fact, become a leader. And it was important to me as a young woman to have that reinforcement. And I see that happening here with the girls in the encouragement to try things that they would never think on their own that they would be willing to do. And I think that mentoring is such an important role modeling for them. Then hopefully, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, as they go out of the educational setting, whether when you're talking with your alums, when you're seeing that continuing in their relationship with the current students or even with their colleagues in the workforce. So but I think that idea of the mentor in both the classroom and in the day-to-day conversations has been tremendously important, impactful.
I think so too, and one of the programs that I've implemented since I've been back at Barnard these 2 years is what we're calling our Constellation program, and it is to create an environment where there is this, at many other women's colleges they have a house system, and in the middle of New York City we don't have a house system. We have all of them in a residence hall and trying to pack as many people into as small amount of space as possible some days. But we want to create a relationship over the generations so that our, I choose not to say our older alums, but our wiser alums are able to really speak into the younger women and to help them to cultivate the kinds of skill sets that they're going to need as they move into later life. And I also think it's very important, we're talking right now as we're working on some learning outcomes and some projects around leadership, that we talk about leadership in the broadest sense. that leadership is not only about being the president, but I also talk to students about leading from behind. Because there are students who are not going to be the president or the titled position, but they're the person that's in the background and says, come on everybody, let's do this. And they're just as important, and they are really in some cases even more important, because you can only have one of those people in that kind of title. But to get the job done, you need somebody who's going to keep it moving from behind. And so we really talk to them about, it's not just about being in a Fortune 500 company, it's the leadership in your family, it's the leadership in your community. Everyone is not going to choose to be be a corporate lawyer, or work in finance, or whatever else the students think is sort of a hot career at the moment. Some are going to choose to be at home and raising their children, and therefore have possibly more time to be engaged with community efforts. And so what kind of leadership are they going to provide there? Because those philanthropic organizations and other community-based organizations are critical to the benefits of our society. And so our students have to understand that leadership is not just about being, the person at the top, but it's about speaking loudly to the things that they value, and offering their resources for the betterment of a community.
So relating to that point, can it be said that all women's colleges perhaps place a greater emphasis on community engagement than do co-ed colleges or universities?
I struggle.
There's much research on that.
I struggle to say, greater or better. I think it's really a matter of different.
Okay.
Because I think that you can look at any co-ed college and they're going to have lots of service opportunities and leadership opportunities. It's a matter of where do the female students fall in that, and what is there to cultivate their sense of this being the expectation, and that this is what leadership is all about in whatever way they choose to manifest their skill set. And is that cultivated with a sense of, you're doing well and we support you? Or is it a place of, you've got great skills, how are you going to partner with this other student, possibly male student, and how are you going to work out that dynamic? And there's a place for both. So I don't want to say better, but I want to say that women's colleges have a commitment to engagement for our students that helps them to see the world through a lens of shoulder-to-shoulder growth and engagement.
Thank you.
Yes?
Teaching in an all-girls high school in the last few years, I always was really surprised when we would start studying things, current issues occurring. Lilly Ledbetter Act, things in economics, statistics in economics, in terms of women in Congress, women in the Senate, how much they earn for the dollar, all this stuff. And it's just fascinating because these girls really have zero sense that there is a very different world outside the bubble. And I don't want to squish their bubble. But I guess my question to you is that what feedback do you get? Because they're always going to have that sense of leadership when they leave an all-women's institution that no other person will have unless they were there. But just wondering what feedback you consistently get in terms of living with that balance day to day. They were shocked that 15 years before I went to college that it was an all-male school that I went to. And, they have no sense really
of time.
Of the time and how short this span really has been. And it's amazing that in literally a generation, it is completely taken for granted on many levels. And so I just was always a little shocked that they were perplexed, and I wanted them to appreciate it,
Yeah. We get older, but somehow they're still really young. You know? All I can say is that I agree with you. I'm sort of stunned when I'm talking to them, and as I say something happened in 1989, I have to realize, oh my gosh, that's like forever ago in their minds. And I'm thinking, that was yesterday. What you said is you don't want to, sort of burst the bubble for them, but I'd rather you burst it than later life. Because for me, my own experience was, I left Barnard after hearing, all of this stuff about what it meant to be a woman. And half of it I thought, Dean Schmitter is so old, and she keeps referencing this old stuff, and it's just not like that anymore. Because I was young and naive. And I went off my first job to work at a college that had, recently gone co-ed. And I should have, bought a clue in the interview when I had the opportunity to meet the president of the college, and he said to me, yes, we're really working very hard to attract a more co-ed staff now that we're co-ed, and even my assistant is a woman. Now that should have, a light bulb should have gone off, right? I had been at a women's college, a light bulb should have gone poof, But instead I just thought, oh, okay, and I took the job. And then I began to understand that being at a women's college and the things that they said to me had value now, because this was the reality that they were preparing me for. So all of a sudden, all the tapes had to start replaying in my head, because this is what they're talking about. Now I'm in an environment that's male-dominated. Now I'm in an environment where I'm one of the few women in this supposedly new co-ed environment, and somebody thinks it's a great success to have an assistant who's a woman, and I came from a place where a woman was the president. It's a little bit confusing. There's cognitive dissonance taking place, But I had the grounding of, what were you told? How do you respond? Doesn't matter what they expect of you. What does Barnard expect of you? Who were you told you are? And that's what I drew on to get through that period, because they had sort of poked holes in the bubble, even though I didn't want them to, but it gave me what I needed to stand when I needed to stand. So they are young, and they think it's always been just a glossy and glorious time. And they're stunned. I tell my students all the time, I say, yes, when I was at Barnard, the dinosaurs were still roaming free up and down Broadway. And they say, oh, Dean Hinkson. But then 2 seconds later, they're saying, when you were a student, did you? And it's like, yeah, they hadn't invented paper yet. It's that bad. But, they're young. And so yeah, they can't imagine the fact that, Columbia was all male when I was a student. They can't imagine the fact that I didn't have the choice of Columbia or Barnard. But I want them to know that I didn't have that choice, but I stood firm and said that Barnard needed to remain a women's college when Columbia chose to go co-ed, because we had seen the way of Radcliffe in terms of a merger with a larger institution. And I'm proud to return to Barnard almost 30 years later and find, for all of those folks who said Barnard would never make it, that Barnard is doing just fine 30 years later, and Columbia's co-ed, and they're doing just fine. And that there's a place in the world for both of us to exist. But I believe firmly that it is our responsibility at girls' schools and at women's colleges to poke little holes in the bubble and say, this is what the real world is all about, because that's the answer to your question. If we don't tell them, when they see it, they'll be surprised. They've got to hear it from me when they can say, she's nuts, but it's okay. They think I'm nuts, but they'll remember what I said.